What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over saving and loading part 2 in our fighting game tutorial series. So in this episode we're mainly going to be going over saving out the rest of our data that we currently have in our settings, for example. So our round time, number of rounds, music volume, and sound effect volume. We'll be saving all that data out. That will be able to be selected one time and saved. Then of course you can save it at any other point after you change it, but especially during the testing phase here, instead of changing the values in the game mode or the game instance specifically, we can actually change them in the settings and then just leave them that way for however long we want to test that specific mode or the feeling of that round time, whatever it is that we may be doing. Additionally, I would like to add saving and loading icons to the screen. So we actually had already created a loading icon for transitioning between levels. We have our loading screen, and then we had a little spinny loading icon. And we stopped using that when we were using the loading screen, but now I'm going to add it to the loading screen. You can see it in the bottom right corner of the viewport there, just to add a little bit more life to our loading screen. And we're going to have a saving icon as well, so whenever we're saving, we'll have an icon spinning. Now, currently in my game, I save after winning a match, so I'm going to spam and defeat this opponent. Maybe throw in some other moves in there to make it slightly more exciting. And once we defeat our opponent, you'll see that there's a little saving icon. It is slightly different than the loading icon. It looks very similar, but it is slightly different. It's a different color. The loading icon is like a blue, whereas this is a light gold or light yellow. And at that point, our data is saved. Here's the loading icon again. And we are good to go. We have everything in our store and settings saved. We quit. So there we go, guys. That's what we're going to cover in today's episode. Before we get started in today's episode, I just want to give a huge thank you to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all of the support and for keeping this series alive. I am so happy that I am able to work on things that you guys are interested in seeing, and I really appreciate everything you guys do. Now, if you want to get caught up in the series before you watch this episode, I believe this is episode 182 of the fighting game tutorial series. We still have a long way to go, but we have made a ton of progress from the beginning, so if you'd like to get caught up and check all that out, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here. That will bring you to the entire playlist of the fighting game, so you can see how we've finished every mechanic that we have in this game. Alternatively, if you don't care about that, you may want to check out this episode right here, which is the previous episode of saving and loading. We are going to be improving upon the old saving and loading logic that we just added, so we're going to want to make sure that we have that previous logic in there. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started. This is a C++ and Blueprint tutorial series, so what we're going to do first is go to our widgets. Actually, we're going to take care of the loading icons, the saving icons, because they're going to be really quick, and we can knock all that out. And then we're going to go over saving the rest of the data. So starting out, let's go to our loading screen widget. And this loading screen widget is the one that I have where I have the name of the tip, as well as a tip description, and a background. Now, if you've been following the series directly, you'll also have a loading icon that we created and animated at one point. So I have this little icon that is blue, and I have an animation to actually animate or rotate this icon, which is a pretty exciting little loading animation just to let the player know that something is going on. And all I've done is added it to this loading screen so that we can actually still use this, because we created this and then when we made the loading screen, we actually never added this again. We just used this background and ignored the icon. At this point, I figured why not combine them? What better time to do it than a saving and loading episode? And it's super simple. In our loading icon, we literally have a play animation in our event construct, and we just play the animation that we created for the widget. So if we add this widget to the loading screen, it will automatically be animated. So all we have to do is go to our loading screen, find our loading icon widget, and drag it into the canvas panel, or whatever parent item you have there. And then position it where you want. I'll show you what I have for my settings, but this is just my stuff. You don't have to do this. I kept everything default except the size, anchor, and alignment. So here are the rest of my settings. Everything's default. It is technically marked as a variable right now, but that's not required, so I'm going to get rid of that. And for my anchor, I wanted it in the bottom right corner, so I just chose this anchor. Once I did that, I set my positions to 0 and 0, my size to be the size of my element, technically a little bit bigger, so 130 by 120, almost a square. And for the alignment, I put 1.0 and 1.0, and the reason for that is because by default, when you are working with an element on a widget, the position is going to be based off the top left part of this element, and so if we have the alignment left at 0 and 0, the anchor is going to put the loading icon below and outside to the right of the canvas panel. I don't want that. I want that with the canvas panel, so I put the alignment to be 1.0, which makes it go all the way to the top right if I put 1.0 on the X, and 1.0 on the Y, which makes it go to the bottom. So we changed it from top left to bottom right, and thus the loading icon is in the bottom right corner. At this point, we have our loading screen with our loading icon, so we don't need that anymore. That is good to go. And now we are going to make our saving icon. It is so incredibly similar. It's very hard to tell here, but it's like a little yellow or a little goldish tint. It is not blue. That's our saving icon. And so what I've done is I have just made another image. So if I go to my loading folder, I had a bunch of different images that I could use for my loading, and I made a little GIF. Then I decided to just animate it in the editor. I've also gone and made a saving icon and just imported it in, and it looks like this. So I have my texture here. As with all other textures, to get this into the editor, it's super easy. You can either just drag it in with your file explorer or import it through the engine itself, but either way, I just have a PNG file that I put in the folder that I wanted in my file explorer, and then it automatically imported for me. So I went to my loading icon widget again, which I already have open here. But I went to it in the content browser, and I duplicated it, and I called the duplicated item the saving icon, and got this. Then I went to my loading icon image. I'm going to change the name to saving icon image. And then I changed the brush image to be my saving icon. The rest of it can pretty much be the same. It's up to you if you want to modify it. So the loading icon actually was forced to that position, but I did not do the alignment like I did on the loading screen, so you see that it has these kind of janky values. It's okay if you want to leave these values. You don't have to change them for any reason. For me, they look a little bit ugly. I like to change them when possible, either to use that alignment like I just showed, or like make it an even number. So at the minimum, I'm going to make it negative 115, but you could also change the alignment to 1.0 and 1.0, and then reposition this a little bit. So 0, 0 is not going to be quite right for the position if you want to line it up with where the loading icon is on the loading screen, because there is a little bit of buffer here. If you want to actually make this perfect, you could manually move it a few units. So you could change the position to be like negative 15 and negative 15 to move it up and out of there, and that should be close enough where you'll never be able to really tell. Or, like I said, you can just leave the crazy value that the loading icon was at, and that will work. But for me, I'm going to try and make sure everything looks exactly how I want it, so I'm going to put the loading icon image as well at negative 15 with an alignment of 1. None of that is super important. That's mainly just for me, but now you can see that everything is lined up exactly the same. And since I duplicated the loading icon, the saving icon is going to have everything we need to animate this image. So I have my animate loading icon and reverse animate loading icon. I'm going to rename these to animate saving icon. And I don't really need the reverse animation, because we can reverse it in the graph. But since we have it, I'm going to change them both to be animate saving icon, reverse animate saving icon. And now my saving icon is basically done. There's one more thing I want to do with it, but I'll get into that after we cover some more of our saving tips. So at this point, we have all of our widgets done. We have our loading icon, loading screen, and saving icon. Now it's time to actually save the data. So I'm going to leave these open, and I'm going to go to the code. Now the first thing I want to do in the code is go to my save game data.h, which is what we made in the previous episode. And in this file, we only had the currency previously because that is the variable that we were saving. Now I want to save out all of my settings that I actually care about saving. So I care about saving the sound effect volume, the music volume, the preferred round time, preferred num rounds, and preferred infinite round time. These names might look a little weird, but I call them preferred because these are the ones we select in the settings, but when we're in story mode or online, our settings aren't necessarily going to be applied. We're going to use perhaps a default value for those game modes. So I call them preferred because it's not saving out the actual round time of the current match or anything. It's just saving out what the player selected is what they would like to choose in the available game modes. So you can follow along with this, but basically just make variables for anything else you want to save. Now, these variables should match the types that you have on your game instance or wherever you're saving them from. So my game instance.h has my sound effect volume, music volume, round time, num rounds, and is round time infinite. So all of these parameters are in my game instance. I want to make sure that these variable types line up. So if it is a float that I am saving out in my save game data, it should be a float. So sound effect volume, music volume are floats. Base game instance, the round time is a float, but you'll notice I made a mistake and the save game data has the preferred round time as an integer. That's fine, but when we save it, the data will be truncated, and that could cause an issue if we ever wanted to be very exact and very precise with our saving. So I'm going to change it. Then we have our num rounds for the base game instance, which is an integer, and we have is round time infinite, which is a boolean. So going back to save game data.h, we have integer preferred num rounds and boolean preferred infinite round time. So add all these variables or add all your own variables and make sure that they are at least a U property of some type so they don't get garbage collected and they are saved properly. I put visible anywhere just so we can visualize them because we don't need to change them in this class or really at all. We only need to change them when we're saving to them, but not anywhere else. So we don't need to make them editable in the blueprint or anything like that. We're just going to make sure that they're visible so we can see them if needed, and that's about it. Now, once you have all these variables in here, go to your save game data.cpp and set up all your values. So for sound effect volume and music volume, I put 1.0. You can put whatever you want, but I recommend matching what you have in your base game instance as the defaults because that just makes the most sense. That way, when you save out your data by default, it already matches what you have with your base game instance until the player changes it. Thus, you're not confused on, oh, why am I setting a value in the base game instance and it's not updating? Well, you're probably loading it in from your file and it's not the same default value. So when the player loads into the game for the first time, they might have a different value than what you'd expect. So I have 1.0, 1.0 for sound effect and music volume. For num rounds, I have 2 and I have 99 for the round time. I'm going to say 99.0f so that we know it's a float and don't make a mistake there. And then is round time infinite is false. So going back to save game data.cpp, let's match that. Sound effect volume and music volume are 1.0f. Preferred round time is going to be 99.0f. Preferred num rounds is going to be 2. And preferred infinite round time is going to be false. You know, I personally like to keep my variables in the same order, so I like to keep integers with integers, floats with floats. I'm keeping the currency above it this time because all of these other ones are settings, but it really doesn't matter. That's just a preference thing, so feel free to move them around, change the order if you'd like. That way you don't go int, float, 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 int, bool. And one other small adjustment I'd like to make, I'm going to move the round time up in the base game instance and replace it with the num rounds. Just change the order of these two. That way, when I am looking at it, I don't get confused and read the wrong numbers. So now they should match in the order that they are being displayed on here. Alright, and now we are good to go. So now my save game data matches my base game instance, and I have all the variables that I want to save out. So we can go into our base game instance.cpp again, and this time we're going to scroll down to our save game function. In the save game function previously, we were only updating the currency. We were updating the currency for the data to save to be the total currency that the player currently had, and then we're going to save that out. But we have to make sure we save all these other variables out now. So I want to have data to save sound effect volume equal to the game instance sound effect volume, the data to save music volume equal to the game instance music volume, data to save preferred round time equal to the game instance round time, data to save preferred num rounds equal to the game instance's num rounds, and data to save preferred infinite round time equal to is round time infinite. Once all of the data in our data to save class is set up properly, then we can still call our save game to slot and nothing else has to change. The save game to slot will take in the entire data to save object and save it at that location. Of course, when we save something, we also have to load in that data as well. So if we scroll down to our load game, we're going to do the same thing we just did, but in reverse. So before, we were setting the total currency that the player had to the data that we loaded in from the file and pulled the currency value from that data. And so our sound effect volume, music volume, round time num rounds, and is round time infinite is the same deal. Sound effect volume on the game instance should be equal to the data to load sound effect volume. So the data we loaded from the file, we want to find the sound effect volume from that and set it equal to the current sound effect volume for the game instance. We're going to do that for the music volume. It's going to equal to data to load music volume. The round time is going to equal the data to load preferred round time. Num rounds is going to equal the data to load preferred num rounds. And is round time infinite is going to equal the data to load preferred infinite round time. So now when we load the data, we're going to pull all the data from the file. We're going to set all of these values to the values we loaded. And when we save the data, we're going to take all the values that we currently have in our game selected and we're going to save them out to the file. At this point, our base game instance is solid. Now we want to display the saving icon to the screen when we're saving. And so there's two types of saving. There is synchronous saving and asynchronous saving. Synchronous saving is what we're doing currently, and what it means is we are just saving, we're forcing the game to save all the data, and then we're going to the next node. If you are playing your game, you don't want to necessarily hitch, you don't want to run into a lot of lag spikes when you're saving your game, so you can save asynchronously, which means it runs on a different thread, it doesn't stop the current thread from running. Since we are saving synchronously, we are going to want to know when to toggle on the saving icon, and then we will remove the saving icon either once that is done or after an arbitrary amount of time. If we do it right after it's done, you most likely won't even see it. It'll be so quick, once it gets added to the screen, the saving icon will almost automatically be gone right away. It's going to be a very quick process at the current time with the data we're saving. So while that is a viable method, I'm going to add a short delay so we can see the saving icon as well, just like I did for the loading icon in the loading screen previously. Now we are going to go into our fighter template game mode.h and we're going to scroll down because we need to make a new function that we can call that will actually display that saving icon. So I've made it a U function that is a blueprint implementable event and blueprint callable. Now, I've called this event display saving icon. You could also have a hide saving icon, but for us, we're just going to have the icon be displayed, and then we're going to hide it after a certain amount of time, since, as I said earlier, the saving process is going to be incredibly quick. So void display saving icon, and that's all we need to add in here. Now, once we do this, we should go to our base game instance.cpp, and we're going to call our function that we just made in the game mode. But to do that, we're going to need to include our fighter template game mode.h. So go ahead and do that in your base game instance.cpp. After doing that, scroll down to your save game function where we just were, and I've added a new if statement above all the logic in that function. And this is what we're going to use to add our saving icon to the screen. So we are going to make sure that we can get the appropriate game mode. So we check if auto game mode, which just means it's going to grab the proper type from the cast result here. So we are going to cast the game mode that we get from the world to our fighter template game mode. And if that succeeds, we will go into the if statement. You see we have cast a fighter template game mode, and then we are casting U gameplay statics, get game mode, get world from that. U gameplay statics is something we have up top. We included it in the previous episode so that we could do some of our saving logic. So you see we used U gameplay statics right below. We can use it in here as well. So it's got dual purpose in here. And now once this if statement returns true, we'll go in here and we'll use our game mode reference that we just got, and we will call our new function on it, display saving icon. Now we are going to go into the editor, and specifically we want to go into our fighter template game mode blueprint class, which for me is my default game mode BP. And once we get in here, we are going to handle that event that we created, that blueprint implementable event. So nothing else in here matters. We're just going to go to our graph, and we are going to search for the event that we made, which I called display saving icon. So whatever you called it, just search that up and pick the event one. Now once you're in here, we have our event. So once that event gets called, we can perform the logic that we want to happen. And what we want to do is create the widget that our saving icon is displayed in. And we want to add that to the viewport. That way the player can see the saving icon on the screen at this point. So we are going to call create widget, and we're going to make sure we select our saving icon class. And once we have that widget, we just need to add it to the viewport for the player to see. So drag off of the return value, type add to viewport, and we're good to go. You'll get what I have here. At this point, we need to make sure that we can hide the saving icon. So I am going to go to my saving icon widget, and in here, we'll go into the graph and do that logic. I went into my graph, I went into my event construct, and after playing the animation, because it plays the animation initially after creating this widget, I create a little 2-second timer that just removes itself after it's created. 2 seconds is more than long enough. It'll all be saved by that point. But now we have time to actually visualize it as the player so that we know we are saving our data. And to do this, it's incredibly simple. Just call set timer by event and grab this node right here. And what this will do is you put in a time in seconds, so 2 seconds, and drag off your event and type add custom event to create a new event and call it whatever you want. Mine I called remove saving icon, but you can call it whatever. And then the logic on this event will trigger after 2 seconds has passed once this node has been executed. So it's going to come in here, 2 seconds are going to pass, this event is going to get called, and in this event we just want to remove the saving icon from the parent, which basically removes it from the screen. So you call it remove from parent. And there you go. So now your saving icon will appropriately be removed after 2 seconds. And you can see that that is the case. So if we play our game one more time, and we beat up our opponent, there you go, the saving icon is showing up, and it disappears. And that's how you know we've done it correctly. So anyway, guys, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon member supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. Incredibly grateful for you guys, and so happy to see where we can take this series in the future. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to assist you, and it is completely free. Otherwise, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.